Good afternoon. I would appreciate if you can take a seat, or find a table. My apologies, we are past 3. That's because I was thinking somebody else is starting the event. All right, so thank you. My name is Kalaimadi. I hail from Malaysia. I'm a professor at the Herbert Wertheim College of Medicine, a researcher. My team currently works on gut microbiomes associated with many diseases, including Alzheimer's. I'm also elected fellow of the American Academy of Microbiology. I've served in the MLK committee since 2010 and founded the MLK at the Frost exhibit in 2011. So we are very excited. This exhibit is ongoing since then. And I particularly want to acknowledge former Provost Doug Watsock, who stood by me when I went through the whole process, and he never misses any of the opening. Thank you, Doug. Thank you. So I will start the event with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that our university is located on the ancestral homelands of sovereign native nations, including the Tequesta, the Calusa, and today the Seminole tribe of Florida, and the Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida. We pay our respects to the traditional custodians, the elders, and the present by fully recognizing indigenous sovereignty as well as the historical and contemporary relationship between indigenous people and their traditional homelands. We'll start the program with, to set the stage for this exhibit, this whole event, which has been in the making for a couple of years. And then one thing I promised Ms. Jenkins is that we will have an exhibit at the Frost. I forgot to mention that I also serve in the Real Rosewood Foundation board. Ms. Jenkins is the descendant of Rosewood family. We will hear a lot more about her, and the exhibit out there is a lot of the things we have in the exhibit comes from her collection. As you know, when this massacre happened, it was word of mouth. By oral history, you keep preserving the story. And so Ms. Jenkins became the custodian of her family story. And I had the fortune of meeting Ms. Jenkins a little less than 8 years ago, I believe, at one of the exhibits, and she had come with my friend, whom I'll introduce in a bit, Mr. Pedro Jermaine. So she's going to render a song that her mom dictated over the years, and she kept writing it until it has gotten a beautiful shape. But it does really captures the moment of the massacre, the emotion. But there's no one better than Ms. Jenkins to render that song for us. Please welcome Ms. Jenkins.
Let's see. Okay. Which one?
Use this. Can she use this, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
My mother's name was Charlisa Brown Robinson, Archer, Florida, Alachua County. She was the sister to the Rhea Rosewood school teacher. And she told me, you will tell Rosewood history because her sister was violated during the Rosewood Massacre. Shared her story with my mom. My mom said, we must keep this history alive and it must never be forgotten. Had it not been for my mother, you would not be here today and I would not be here She said to me, research, authenticate, document, and tell the truth. And for the last 30 years, I have honored her wishes. You also need to know the mood I was in when this assignment came to me. I hated it. I was angry. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life researching Rosewood Massacre. But because she was my mom, and back then we didn't have a choice. So I had to obey her, deal with the anger and being chased out of Rosewood. Fun after the fact, but I did it for my mom and for you. And let me tell you about me. I was born October 25th, 1938 in Archer, Florida. On our kitchen table, midwife Mitty Clayton. My mother said when I was born, my dad grabbed me up, little bloody baby, popped me on my little hip, and I inhaled. He took me to the door and he lifted me up and said, God bless my child. I have been a blessing to my dad, and today I hope I'm a blessing to you. And the song she always told me, when you tell the Rosewood story, you must sing a song. However, baby, I know you can't sing, but sing it anyway. I had to let you know I am not a singer. And it goes like this. Rosewood, Florida, borders Highway 24. A destroyed town, no blacks live there anymore. Where emptiness resides in the silent sacred breeze. Life there no more, only nature's moss-hung trees. Rosewood, Florida once was a growing community, linked with chains of love and family unity. Families were linked with wholesome friendship, and each link represented a special kinship. In this productive southern town of Rosewood, here the families bonded and they understood each other's lives in their unique neighborhood. Lordy, 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 Rosewood used to be real good until a little old sleazy woman with a cheating heart triggered the Rosewood Massacre, and the colored had to depart. They ran for their lives in the middle of the night. They'd heard a mob was a-coming to start a hideous fight. Run, 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 run on for your life. Oh, Lord, hide anywhere, just try to survive. Children follow their leaders with fear in their souls and almost froze to death because it was so cold. They were told not to move by the ones in charge, but trying to keep silent was awfully hard. Messages were sent to them by Sheriff Bob Walker. Listen out for John Rye, the designated talker. The Cedar Key train conductors were told to pick up in Rosewood. Standing by the tracks with the lantern, its young school teacher stood, waiting in desperation to carry out the sheriff's plans, to round up the hidden survivors, to board the midnight train. The sheriff and the store owner worked around the clock. Oh, Lord, informed the train conductors just when and where to stop, to pick up the men, women, and children who were hiding out and bring them to Archer, Florida, traveling the same old route. Bob Walker and John Wright took on a daring risk, put the survivors on the train, Lord, and sent them out with a kiss. Notified the Gainesville families to be on the lookout for their kin. Told them the train was coming and told them exactly when. John and William Bryce headed on up the track, dropping off other survivors, not taking the time to look back, counting heads and making a list, doing what they knew they should. to report to Sheriff Bob Walker back down in Rosewood. Waldo Stark, Lord T. Maxville, the train kept chugging along. Baldwin, Callahan, K-Town, Briceville would soon become their home. The Fanny Taylor lie had ruined their lives, and her story didn't set too well. And deep down within each survivor's heart, they knew one day they would have a story to tell about Rosewood, Florida, once was a growing community. Oh, Lord, until the fighting started in 1923. No one ever thought Rosewood would go down in death. That brought on so much pain and unforgettable distress. Countywide shame, statewide shame, worldwide shame, that brought on so much painful shame. Oh, Lord, and unforgettable distress. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Ms. Lizzie. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yadi Rivero. I am Assistant Curator here at the Frost and also a member of the MLK Commemorative Celebration Committee. I am pleased to be introducing our participants for today's panel. First, we have Professor Alex Cornelius, who will be moderating the panel. She is Associate Teaching Professor and Director of Women's Studies at FIU. She's a Senior Instructor in History and African Diaspora Studies. She's an active mentor to graduate students in AADS, History, and Global Sociocultural Studies. Dr. Cornelius created and offered courses in African American men and women's intellectual history, Civil War and Reconstruction, race, gender, and science in the Atlantic world, and new directions in African American history. Next, we have Miss Lizzie Jenkins, who I don't think she needs an introduction again. She's a performer, but also an educator. She's the niece to Maholda Gussie Carrier, who was a Rosewood school teacher from 1915 to 1923. She's committed to research and history, and after getting her master's from Nova University, she has dedicated her life to sharing and preserving the story of Rosewood. Next, we have Professor Dan Royles, who is Associate Professor of History here at FIU. Dan Royles is a historian of the United States, African American life and culture, public health, sexuality, social movements, and the human body. He currently serves as the principal investigator for a comprehensive historical context study contracted by the National Park Service of violence against people of African descent in the United States and its territories from 1500 to the present day. And finally, we have Pedro Jermaine, who is the first vice president and the resident artist of the Real Rosewood Foundation. He is also the resident artist to U.S. Congresswoman Frederica S. Wilson. He has served as the headline artist for the annual MLK commemorative celebration here at FIU. And you can see his collage outside in the lobby. It's called The Headline, History is Who We Are. His painting is also right on the other side of this wall, called Hope Prevails. Please join me in giving our panelists a warm welcome.
Greetings, everyone. It is a pleasure to see so many people here. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for coming. I do have a list of folks that I'd like to thank. Jordana Pomeroy, of course, the director of this lovely institution. Amy Galpin and Yadi Rivero, who are, if you have not worked with them, find a way to avail yourself of the pleasure of working with these two really wonderful people. Dr. David Bynes, Chair of MLK Commemoration Committee, the Green Family Foundation, the Real Rosewood Foundation, Florida Humanities, Knight Foundation, Humanities Edge, George Carter, Dr. Valerie Patterson, and African Diaspora Study, and other donors who made it possible for all of us to be here today. And usually I know when people read these lists, people tune out, but I do think it's really important to thank everyone who contributed to us being here today. Of course, a special thank you to Ms. Lizzie Jenkins, who you'll hear from shortly again. It is her tireless efforts and her mother's insistence that the history be preserved that is responsible for our presence. And of course, I want to thank Pedro Jermaine and the Miami artists, Rhea Leonard, Charlisa Montrope, Chire Regans, and Tori Scott, who are using their art to make sure that this history stays alive. Ms. Jenkins and colleagues of the Rosewood Foundation preserved and shared this history, passing it on from one generation to another during a period when no one else valued this history. During a period when not only was the history devalued or dismissed or rendered invisible, but the people also were too. The fact that we're here today is no small thing. And I want to underscore the extent to which we need to be aware of the fact that whenever we have people whose history are being discredited or devalued, that those people often become subject to verbal and physical violence. That is what history shows us. It is the history of people of Jewish descent, of African American descent, of the Tutsis, LGBTQ communities. The space between the devaluation of history and subjection to violence can collapse very quickly. And so when we see that history being devalued, it is cause for concern, and it is cause for alarm. I'm really very grateful again to all of those folks who made it possible for us to be here today, 100 years after the fact, to reclaim this history. I'm really grateful that maybe 100 years from now we'll be able to look back at the Frost and their efforts and know that we are all on the right side of history. I'd like to welcome the panelists to come up to the front at this time. First, we'll hear from Ms. Lizzie Jenkins, who will provide us with an overview and more information on her leadership in the preservation of Rosewood history. We'll then hear from Dr. Dan Royles, Associate Professor of History here at FIU, as you heard, who's also the PI on the National Park Services grant charged with documenting the history of racial violence in the United States. And he'll provide us with additional historical context for today's presentation and exhibit. And then we'll hear from Pedro Jermaine, who really has a bird's eye view, and we'll hear more about his leadership and his significant role in making this exhibit come to life. After their presentations, we'll then open the panel up to questions from the audience. Okay, so, Ms. Jenkins, would you?
I think this one.
Okay. I almost ask you, what am I supposed to talk about? You know what? This story is not easy to tell, so you want me to share?
To provide the audience, yes, with an overview of how it is you decide. Well, you told us in song and
Yes.
In your presentation why it is you started collecting the history. I would like you to share. I think many people really want to know what kept you going all of these
Okay.
years and the road that led us here today.
I've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting because my mom didn't give me a choice, trusting and believing in her because she believed in her sister, who was the Rosewood school teacher, as I said, from 1915 to 1923 and survived. But her story, the abuse that happened to her January 1, 1923, by the KKK that traveled to Sumner just to cause a problem at the lie, or believing the lie that Fannie Taylor said a black man assaulted her. And that black man was my uncle, the husband to the Rosewood school teacher, and so much happened. When my aunt, remember I told you about the train, escaped on the train, and I'm going to call it a freedom train, came to Archer January 4, 1923, and shared her story with my mother, who was still living at home with her parents at age 20 and single. She came in the house, inside the house, went straight to my mother's bedroom, fell across the bed, and sobbed for days. Told only my mother her story because she was too embarrassed to tell her parents that she had been gang raped by the mob. So she shared it with my mom. And for years afterward, my mom carried that story. It became her story, and I believe my dad's story. And one day, 1943, I was age 5. She needed to share that story and talk to somebody else about the pain that she too was enduring because of her sister's agony. And Mom said to her 4 children, I was 5, brothers 7, 9, sister 11, y'all sit down on the settee. Mama's going to tell you a story about sister and the Rosewood Massacre. I knew she referred to her sister. That's the affectionate name she called her sister, Mahalda Gussie Brown Carrier, the school teacher. And I knew from those words and from the meaning and the expression on her face that it wasn't good. I had no idea what massacre meant. Rosewood, roses in the woods came to my mind. But my mom continued to tell that story and everything in details that I don't remember today. But I remember then, and I knew something that happened was not good. She sat there, she twirled her fingers, and she talked about Rosewood and her sister. And her sister was my favorite school teacher, my home school teacher. And as I said, I was 5, and I listened. My brothers went to sleep on her story, and I was a little upset with them, but they're bigger than I am. Why are you going to sleep on my mom's story? And I was so involved in that story. They went to sleep. My sister was in another world. She didn't want to hear that. She was looking, you know. And here I am, age 5, trying to hold on to that history. But I remembered that history just attached itself to me. And I went to sleep too. But when I arose, awakened, and it might be woke up the next morning, that story was there, and I looked at my mom because I wanted more. You know, back then people talked with their eyes, and my mom said to me, this is not the right time, because she was making breakfast for us. And back then, mothers made breakfast. Dad got up every morning at 4 o'clock and taught us the same thing. I hated that, getting up at 4. But we had to milk the cows, feed the chicken, water the ducks, cut the wood before we went to school. We had to work. My dad owned a farm. And my mom made hot biscuits, bacon, eggs. So it was not the right time. I went to school this particular day thinking that that story happened last night. This was 1943. It happened 20 years earlier. But I was not able to distinguish between I guess, times and what had happened and that kind of thing. So I took that story to school with me, not remembering anything the teacher said. And after then, I carried that story daily. My mother was not ready to talk about it, but one day I said to her, Mom, when it was just the two of us, tell me that story again. And that's when it became our story. And whenever we were not around my siblings or my dad, we talked about the story. I took the story to school with me, high school, to college, to work, after school. And it just became a part of who I am today. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it made me who I am. The one thing I do know, mother said, research, authenticate, and tell the truth. And the one thing that I hear when people talk about the Rosewood story today, if it's not true, from my thermostat, that's not the right word, goes from 0 to 100, less than 2 seconds. If you are going to talk about Rosewood in my presence and you have not done the research, don't talk in my presence, because I've done it for 30 years. The only question I cannot answer about what happened in Rosewood was how many living people were in Rosewood in 1923 when it was burned down. And I think I have said enough so that you can later ask questions. But anyway, Rosewood, I feel like I'm the face of Rosewood and the voice of Rosewood. I will not be silenced by Rosewood. Silence is complicity, and we don't talk, we all lose. So let's talk about Rosewood, and let's keep Black history alive. And I want I'm not going to call his name, but I want him to know you are really smart. You know who I'm talking about. We got to tell him he will not ban Black history. This is not his history to say, oh, we are going to, because the kids. What about my cousins that were lynched in Orchard, February 12, 1912? They didn't want to die. So now we are going to worry about how kids feel. How do we think they feel? So I will fight him with your help. You're going to say, well, Lizzie told me to fight. We will not allow, and I certainly mean that, we cannot allow our history to go untold. Our history is America's history. Okay? It's not Black history. History is who we are, and without history, we are nothing. And I can talk 30 hours on this story, so I'm going to pass the mic.
I guess I have the unenviable task of following Ms. Jenkins. So thanks to Alex and thanks to everybody. Thanks to all of you for being here, because it is really important that we gather and remember this story in particular on its 100th anniversary and all of its specificity. But I guess my task here is to give some historical context for Rosewood, because very sadly, Rosewood was not a unique event in the history of the United States. In recent years, many more people have come to be aware of other similar incidents, of other race riots, of other racial expulsions, of other massacres of Black communities perpetrated by white mobs in the name of white power and white supremacy. We know much more about Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, about Elaine, Arkansas in 1919, about Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. And these are just a few examples of the many, many, many full-scale assaults on Black people and Black communities that occurred in this country between the end of the Civil War in 1865 and the Great Depression in the 1930s, just that period. Many, many, many events like Rosewood. And Rosewood wasn't even unique in the scope of Florida history. just 7 years before, in 1916, at least 6 African Americans were lynched in a mass lynching in Newberry, Florida. Just over 2 years before Rosewood, there was a massacre of dozens of African Americans in Ocoee, Florida, on election night 1920. And less than a month before the events at Rosewood, there was a similar assault on the Black community in Perry, Florida, in December 1922. That resulted in the deaths of a number of people and the burning of homes and institutions in the Black community, in an event that looks very much like what would unfold at Rosewood just a month later. So it's important to point out that what we see happen in Rosewood, what we saw happen in Rosewood, followed a very familiar pattern that we see in many of these other events. You had the accusation of sexual assault by a white woman against a Black man, and that escalated into a full-scale assault on an entire Black community, and sometimes to the point, as happened in Rosewood, that the entire community was either murdered or driven out, and any material evidence that the community had ever existed was erased from the landscape. And the fact that this started with an accusation of sexual assault by a white woman against a Black man is really important to this story, because this idea that violence was necessary to protect white women was central to the story that whites, and especially Southern whites, told themselves and told each other about why this violence was supposedly necessary. And we know, of course, that this was a lie. And we knew that this was a lie 30 years before Rosewood, because I.W. Wells showed us that the thing that precipitated events like Rosewood was not that white women were being threatened by Black predators. It was that the institutions of white supremacy were being threatened by Black people and Black communities who were standing in their power. In Elaine, it was Black farmers organizing to get fair wages. In Ocoee, it was Black residents who were trying to vote, who were clawing back some of the political power that they had lost under Jim Crow. And in Tulsa, it was Black Oklahomans who had built a community that was so prosperous that it was nicknamed Black Wall Street. So where Rosewood is exceptional is that reparations were actually paid to survivors, which has not yet happened in any of the other examples that I mentioned. And this happened in Florida through a bill passed in the legislature in 1994 that granted $150,000 to each of the survivors, each of the living survivors. That wasn't enough, and it was much less than the survivors hoped to get, but it was something. And it was made possible because people researched and authenticated and documented and told the truth about what happened. So on the one hand, there was a team of historians that issued a report to the legislature, a report on the massacre, and on the other hand, you had the testimony of a handful of survivors who described not only the horrors of those days in Rosewood, but how they and their families had been permanently scarred by what happened. Because in Rosewood, as in so many of these other stories, people lost their land, people lost their homes, people lost their belongings and their heirlooms, people lost loved ones who were murdered, people lost their community, people lost any sense of security that they might have had. So thinking about the role that historians and the role that historical testimony played in getting some measure of justice in Rosewood, it's hard not to also think about the erasure of history like Rosewood in states like Florida, but not just Florida, that's going on at this very moment, where teaching any kind of history that might challenge the idea that we have ever been anything but great, or to threaten educators who even come close to challenging this narrow line of thinking when it comes to events like Rosewood, where that is all under threat. And I think that these attempts to shut down any kind of discussion about the difficult parts of our history is not just, it's a lot of things, but it's trying to avoid the issue of reparations, it's trying to score political points, it is both of those things, but it is also, in a larger sense, recognizing that studying history like Rosewood makes it clear to us that the way things are now is not the way that things have to be. So the parts of this state and the parts of this country that are almost entirely white are not that way because people just like to be with their own kind, which is something that you will sometimes hear. It is because people were driven out of places like Rosewood. And for those who weren't, they looked at places like Rosewood and saw what happened and decided that it just was not safe to be around white people. The suburbs were not overwhelmingly white for decades because black people did not want to live in them. It was because there was a whole architecture of policy and practice, including violence, that kept the suburbs that way. We don't have a massive racial wealth gap in this country because white people are more capable. It is in part because black people were dispossessed of their property through violence. And it's recognizing that the way that things are is not the way things have to be that makes the study of history and the true study of history, not the glorification of some mythic past, is threatening to people who are so heavily invested in maintaining the status quo. Because studying history, really studying history, means seeing the paths that were not taken, the opportunities that were foreclosed, and it means being able to imagine a better present than the one that we're living in. And if we can imagine a better present, then we can imagine and we can build a more just future. And that is what it means to remember Rosewood in 2023.
So for me, actually, I'm a little bit more than just Lizzie's resident artist and vice president. I'm also the chauffeur. I'm the caretaker. I was just telling Lart earlier, I'm like, you have no idea what it's like to have Lizzie in your car. You feel like you're driving with a piece of Florida's history in your car. So you're trying to be like really careful. So it's very surreal. So now I'm going to tell the story of how we met. So the president has given me orders, and I have to tell this story. So in 2016, I was actually serving as a resident artist for UNESCO TST. And I attended Rosewood Reparations Banquet in Gainesville at the Hilton. And I knew about the story of Rosewood. I saw Lizzie. I had no idea who Lizzie was at the time. But I see all these people approaching Lizzie. I'm like, well, obviously she's very important. And so out of a room of like 600-700 people, Lizzie signals over to me and she calls me over to her table. What are the chances? So I go over and we start talking about what I do as an artist. She tells me about the foundation. She invites me to sit down at the table in the banquet. So we sit together and she asked me if I would like to be resident artist of the Rosa Foundation. I was thinking to myself, well, you don't have to do like a background check or anything. So we start discussing some different opportunities and things that I could bring to the table for the foundation. And I was like, well, as a visual artist, I think we need a visual reference, like an art piece, something that signifies Rosewood. And that is how the painting Hope Prevails came about. Now, the process, I think we actually planned that painting for about a year and a half, because I remember going to Lizzie, I'm like, well, do I have like reference photos? No, there's no reference photos for Rosewood, so it has to be my interpretation of the events that unfolded. And so what I chose to portray in my painting was, I guess, the point of the attack on Rosewood and where the residents flee into the surrounding woods and nearby areas. And in that painting, it shows, you leaving like the comfort of an area that you know, things that you are familiar with. And now you've been forced into this, like, I guess, great big unknown world. And hearing Lizzie's take on this about the residents fleeing into those nearby woods on a very cold winter's night, most of them barefoot, taking what little possessions they have and hiding in those woods for, was it like a couple of days, probably? Yes. It's kind of unfathomable to me at this point in my life, I can't quite picture any of that right now, or can't quite imagine what they were going through. But as a resident artist, I think it is just my job to be able to take these events, very dark past, and kind of shine a ray of hope on it. Like has to just bring some hope through my work, and that is what I try to do with Hope Prevails. And as Lizzie's vice president, second role, it is my job to try and to facilitate certain relationships and partnerships with different organizations and entities throughout the state. So serving as the MOK headline artist here for a decade gave me a window of opportunity. So I actually brought Lizzie to one of our MOK breakfast ceremonies where she met Dr. Mathie. And then we had an opportunity to develop and open different doors for the Rosewood Foundation. And we started to discuss an exhibit that would take a couple of years to bring about, which is what you see before you today. And I also work with Green Space with my friends Kimberly Green and Mireille. And I serve as their senior artistic advisor, so that gave me another opportunity to connect her to my friends, or as I like to say, family, at Green Space. So it's a lot of work, but it's very rewarding to see all of this unfold. And one thing in particular that I was telling Lizzie, I think one of my favorite artifacts out there is the Bible, that little tattered Bible. Lizzie says that your grandfather taught them to read on that Bible. And I'm bringing this up because I think religion plays such an important role in Black culture. And with me growing up Southern Baptist, my family, I see that because, and I think it stems from slavery and the important role that religion played. And you got the hymnals and religion and all this stuff. And I was actually having this discussion with Lizzie last night. I was like, Lizzie, you know when you do the hymn and they're like humming the hymn? Lizzie's like, yes, Pedro, that's so they could communicate. And they had this way of communicating so the slave master wouldn't know what they were saying. It was like almost in code. I was like, yes, that is it. And it just goes to show that when you constantly oppress a certain race, they have to find comfort and solace in something. And that is where the religion comes from, because it is there. It is just something for them to confide and to believe in. And that's why I think that Bible just means so much to me, that just piece of history.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those thought-provoking, very sobering, but also very inspiring messages. I know that there are probably many people who want to ask questions, so I'll open the floor up to questions now. Yes.
It's really, it's a ballad of, biblical proportion. It's just wonderful.
Give her the microphone. Oh, we have only one microphone? Okay. I'm getting some exercise.
You know the story about this ballad in 1995. Let me backtrack to tell it has not, and it has been recorded. However, I think I prefer singing it a cappella like I did just now. But my mother wrote that song. She was a genius, 8th grade education, okay? And she wrote it like in 2 minutes. She dictated it to me. She said, take shorthand, you're the teacher. And she used that often. But anyway, after she did that, she said, okay, you need to get it recorded. I said, Mom, where am I going to get the song recorded? Studio in Gainesville. So I looked in the book, and I found a studio, Mirror Image. I'm telling you this story because it touched my heart. The young man, I went in to open the door, Mirror Image. A guy walked out, the owner of the studio, and said, "Can I help you?" I said, "My name is Lizzie Robinson Jenkins, and I have a song I want to record." And he said, "Okay, tell me about it." I said, "It's called Rosewood, Florida." He looked at me like, "I don't want to hear about Rosewood." However, another young man walked out, his partner, and we started a conversation. He said, "Well, sing it for me." I did. Sing it again, I did. Sing it again, I did. And they recorded it. Last year, leading up to the centennial, this young man got in touch with me that did the recording. And he said to me, "I want to plan your centennial, and I have written a song from Rosewood to Redemption I want to sing." In other words, I said that to say, I thought that guy was not interested in my song. But from 1995, when he recorded it, until last year, he had carried that song with him. So you remind me when you said that it, touched your soul. I thought of this young man. So one day he said, "I'm going to sing my song from Rosewood to Redemption." And he started singing the song. And he said to me, he said, "I'm so tired. I need to stop the song right here." He said, "I'm sick." He said, "I got bone cancer." And my heart just started dripping tears. And I went and met with some of his friends who were, recording my story. And while sitting there, his friend Earl said, "Bob died last night." And when he told me that, it was like, I died too. I was just so crushed. But so many people love this song. And I should have told you, I don't have a problem with you all recording it. If I can send it or put it out there, of course I need the money now. Don't think I don't. And that's going to be next. I'm going to ask you all for money. But forgotten what I was about to say. But anyway, that song people like it, and I want it out there because the history needs to be out there. And my mother knew what she was doing because she would not allow people to talk about the white folks that helped the blacks escape. She did not allow that. Okay, because if you notice the train conductors, white guy, brothers from Brightsville, the store merchant, okay, his great niece called me a couple of 3 years ago and told me the whole story about those people, her people, and said to me, "I have pictures, I have photos of them. Would you like them?" I said, "Of course." And I told her, I said, "You need to write a chapter for my book." She did. She sent it to me. People are involved, and I want you to know that my board is very diverse. I want you to know that I'm in the house, the Rosewood house that I'm skipping about, was donated to us. And Ted Yoho, who is a very conservative Republican, called me and said, "Miss Lizzie, I'm taking you on C-SPAN." He went to C-SPAN. He talked about Miss Lizzie and Rosewood for 4.5 minutes. He called me and said, "I am retiring, but before I retire, I'm going to make sure I introduce the bill for what, Pedro? No, for landmark, for the historical landmark for Rosewood." He did this. So as we are working right now, we are trying to, they gave the house, the young couple gave it to us. We are trying to buy that house from them for $2 million and make it, the only place we can make it a historical landmark, it will have to stay in Rosewood. And we had planned to move it to Archer. So remember I told you I'll be begging for money. And my website is Rosewood, Florida, www.rosewoodflorida.com. $2. Make it recurring. Okay? I don't want $2 million, just $2 from each of you in here. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, so before you go to bed tonight, you tell God, I need to make this donation, okay? And next question. Yes.
It's just outside the John Wright's house. It's the most desecrated sign in Florida, if not in the U.S. You want to speak very quickly to that?
The last time I counted, it had been damaged or decimated 18 times. And each time they would call me. And you know what? I made sure I'm backtracking, I'm backing up. When I went to Governor Jeb Bush's office and I asked them for a sign, I initiated that. I said, we need a historical marker. Okay, you know, we'll call you back. I called back. Well, it's going to cost you $2,400, okay? 3 weeks, didn't hear. Call back. Now it's $1,200. Okay, call back. Well, we just decided to donate it. When can you send us the script? I said, what's your email address? He'd already written it. So when we brought that sign here, I was really kind to him. I invited him to do to be the keynote speaker, to dedicate the marker. He came, brought hundreds of people, okay, from across Florida, met him there. I'm a diehard Democrat. He's a Republican. This is not political. History is not political. We need to get the work done. My goal is to close the racial divide. It's too much hate. It's too many guns out there. I don't like that. And I know you don't either. So I'm working with everybody across the board. I don't care what color, it doesn't matter. History is who we are. And until we work together and talk to each other, the reason many times we don't talk, we don't know each other. So I talk to anybody. Okay, enjoy it. If I want to, I'm not going to go there. But I do say things sometimes I shouldn't say. They know I'm crazy too, but that's okay. I'm getting my point across, and I have lots of friends. And by the way, have y'all heard of Steve Spurrier? Okay, Coach Steve Spurrier. They offered me to do my podcast there. And they named my podcast Queen Lizzie Podcast. Do I look like a queen to you? Your vision is 2020. But anyway, I'm on 5 channels now. I will be on 37 channels telling the Rosewood story. And if anybody want to call me and do a Zoom with me on my podcast, you got it. If you notice in the hall, there is Meldon Law and me on a podcast. Meldon Law is an attorney in Gainesville, loves Rosewood. I have been on his podcast 4 times, and he told me the other day, well, I need to be on your podcast. I said, look, I'm just getting it up and running. But he wants to be on, so I'm going to have to bring him on my podcast. So the help is there, the vision is there. I just need help, okay? And if each of you would get 5 other people to pay $2, we'll soon have those $2 million. I haven't forgotten that, okay? $2. But anyway, next question.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, really? I talk too much, huh?
No, not at all.
Well, it's always a joy. I am moved to hear your story, primarily after having done major research on Rosewood myself. I took a group of young men to the Rosewood site back in the 1990s after the movie came out about Rosewood, and I would like to ask, in the context of accuracy of what was depicted in the movie, how accurate was that? When I spoke with one of the consultants who helped putting together that particular story, She said that it modified the end about 10 times because it was so brutal. Fabian was depicted in the movie. Could you please speak to that and how we can get more people to appreciate this skewing of history to persuade certain people's mindsets? Thank you so much.
I tell you what, my mother was 20, as I said, when Rosewood happened. And believe it or not, in 1997, the movie theater that screened the movie in Gainesville reached out to her. She was the keynote speaker after the movie. So they asked her, she was 95 at that time, they asked her, Mrs. Robinson, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the movie? She said 6 or 7, okay? And she said, but the two most important things, it let people know that Rosewood happened, and it let people know that white women lie on black men. And the entire movie went, like she was not supposed to say that, because they were mostly white. And my mother put her hand on her hip and said, I am 95 years old. I have earned the right to say what I want to say. Not only did they lie on black men, they are still lying today on black men. Complete silence. So she gave it a 7 or 6.5. Okay. Did I answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Please, let's thank our panelists.
Wait, he said something. May I hear what?
I said, thank you so very much. Very much so you answered the question.
Okay.
And we are always here to support you from the Office of the Congressman Frederica Wilson, so definitely.
Okay, Dr. Scott.
Bless you.
Thank you. And I want to welcome Dr. Matthew back to the stage. And as many of you know, she's been a long-standing member, driving force for many years of the MLK committee. So let's also give our panelists as well as Dr.
You know what? I have one other thing I am saying.
The floor is yours.
Look, I'm not begging. I have written a book that says Lizzie's Rosewood Race. Remember I told you about my dad, In this book, it tells about my Rosewood race starting at a child. No, I don't have any books for sale. I just want you to know this is a children's book. In this book, I have several pictures, and they're all of black children. When I was in school, there was not a black child in a book that I have ever read. I showed it to a little girl, 2 years old, and I asked her, who is this? And she said, me, 2 years of age. What I want to do, and you can tell the governor, that this book is going to be in every child's hand, black and white. It needs to be. It tells a good story with butterflies and fish and animals. But no, I don't have any for sale.
So I'd like to thank the panelists. I know Ms. Lizzie sort of alluded to the fact. So Rosewood right now has no African Americans, no blacks. The house that you see pictures of on the wall is John Wright's house. It's the only standing building after the massacre because it belonged to John Wright. He's a white store owner who also helped the blacks escape the massacre. The house, if you ever to go visit Rosewood, and a couple of times, a couple of people that I know of from the board has gone there, and we had to live to the sound of gunshots. They do not want to see people who don't look like them in Rosewood. Hence, the Rosewood, that particular building either moves, so something has to happen. The current white owners have donated it. The important thing is that Miss Lizzie Jenkins has generously donated her land, 27 acres of land in Archer, for a future museum, and that's generosity talks bounds. And we have worked with FIU School of Architecture with Dr. Nathan D'Souza and Dr. Roberto Rivero to develop a potential floor plan, the space plan for a future museum. And as she said, all these requires lots and lots of money, big hearts, and sponsors. It's all work in progress as far as we are concerned. So I do really want to thank Ms. Yadi Rivero for coordinating all the efforts with the panelists, as well as putting the exhibit together, Ms. Amy Galpin. And Ms. Yadi is really, she's my co-chair with this for the MLK Museum Committee. I would like to invite back Pedro, and he usually does sort of invocation after the panelists to the second half of the program. He already told you that he is a vice president and resident artist. He also didn't tell you that he's resident artist for the U.S. Congresswoman Frederica S. Wilson and 5,000 Role Models of Excellence. I would like to say that FIU can take pride in introducing Pedro to the South Florida community and to the world, I think. And he's also, so here, please, Pedro, would you do the honors?
I'm just trying to get this all figured out here. Okay, this is my MLK painting, right? So, on January 13th, I was actually having a conversation with Dr. Jeanette Cruz, and she actually said something that stuck with me. We were discussing my art, and she said Pedro when he does art, it comes from his heart. And actually, as a young teen, I would often look at my reflection in the mirror. So every day I look at my reflection, and I would ask myself, what is your purpose in life? So I was pretty self-aware at a young age because I wanted to facilitate change. And my art is a reflection of that desire. I recently took a bold step and presented a collage for the new MLK piece. So for the past 10 years, I think it's been more traditional oil painting. So I took a bold step and presented a collage this year. So it was an extreme change from what I would normally do. But that is a representation of that young boy searching for his purpose. And it is a purpose that we must all be a part of. We are bold, we are vocal, and we aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And as that piece states, we will constantly make headlines because history is who we are. Thank you.
Isn't he succinct and beautiful, that Rich? I always like what he does. So let me introduce our director, Pomeroy, Dr. Jordana Pomeroy. Has a Ph.D. in art history from Columbia University. Before joining FIU, she served as the director of Louisiana State University Museum, and she joined the Patricia Flip Frost Museum in 2015, January. And 4 years after we started the exhibit, I was just telling her, I still remember the first day I ran into her, and I was busy putting up the artwork and things, and she walks up to me, "What are you doing?" It's like, what are you doing in my space, But rest is history. It's been an amazing journey with her. Please welcome Dr. Pomeroy.
Okay, I think I was a lot nicer than that, Calais. I don't remember saying that. But it was surprising to see you hanging up artwork, and that's when we started to talk about making this exhibition, the exhibitions that you had been working on, into a formalized series here at the Frost Art Museum. And that's been a huge success. Thank you, Calais. I just actually wanted to start taking a moment of silence to honor the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King and the victims of the Rosewood Massacre. Thank you for that. And now I also really do want to applaud the Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Committee at FIU. I've never been prouder than I am today to be director of this museum at FIU. I want to particularly thank Calais Mati and Yadi Rivero for the time that they've dedicated in the fight for justice and equality. This exhibition comes because of the time and talent they dedicated to this important FIU community. So thank you so much. What is an elegy? What is an elegy anyway? Elegy to Rosewood. An elegy is a form of a poetry or song used to express mourning or grief. We write elegies to honor the deceased, and sometimes elegies explore themes of loss, sorrow, and remembrance. And when we were wordsmithing the title, elegy just popped in my head as the right word for this exhibition. Because this exhibition is about memory and history. It relates a tragic story handed down primarily by the women who lived in Rosewood and told to us by Lizzie Robinson Jenkins. Lizzie's deep knowledge and passion has provided the fuel for this exhibition. She founded the Real Rosewood Foundation to preserve the history of this Black community, founded in the late 1800s by freed slaves. Rosewood struggled mightily under Jim Crow, but nevertheless thrived as a vibrant center for farming, business, and raising families. I want to acknowledge Professor Alex Cornelius. There's bound to be a lot of re-acknowledgements and acknowledgements because we have a lot of people up here and you all deserve to be acknowledged over and over again. Your scholarship has strengthened this exhibition, providing historical and contextual background information. And as Lizzie so succinctly said, without history, we are nothing. I would like to extend a special thank you to our exhibition sponsors and donors, our supporters who made this exhibition possible. We are grateful for your dedication to preserving the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. Thanks times two go to Kimberly Green and Mireille Charles of the Green Family Foundation for their support not only of this exhibition, but of another exhibition that will open on February 4th, Everything Earth and Sky, an exhibition of Haitian art. So you are all invited to that as well. Thank you, squared. We are deeply grateful to the Knight Foundation for a challenge grant that allowed us to undertake an elegy to Rosewood. This exhibition also exemplifies the saying, "It takes a village." And our village at FIU includes Valerie Patterson in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies and Dean Brian Schreiner in the College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts, who have unfailingly supported our MLK exhibition series year after year. Thanks as well go to Marianne LaMonica, who cannot be here tonight. Unfortunately, she did not feel well, director of the Humanities Edge program, who helped support the panel discussion today. I also want to give a shout out to our corporate community partner, the Intercontinental Doral, which has kindly provided us with elegant housing for our VIPs, and I'm very, very grateful to them because it's those things that you don't think about that are huge budget relievers for us, and so send everybody you know to the Intercontinental Doral. I also want to acknowledge, of course, the contemporary artists we commissioned to create artist books, who help us understand history through their work and provide new perspectives on historical events that occurred 100 years ago. I would like to give a round of applause to the artists in our midst, and especially Pedro Jermaine, Chire Regans, Rhea Leonard, Tori Scott, and Charlisa Montrope. Thank you. By the way, their works, we are working on our signage still, and if you didn't see it, there's an entire other section of this exhibition as you walk in to the right in our Discovery Gallery. So I'm sorry if that wasn't clear, but you will have plenty of time to take that in after this program concludes. I, of course, am very, very excited about our curatorial team that brought this together so beautifully, and I want to highlight Amy Galpin, Kevin McGarry, and Lourdes Ranero, who worked tirelessly to research and gather the artifacts and materials on display. Their passion and dedication to this project has been truly inspiring. Thank you. And this exhibition has legs, which I love to say. When it closes here, it will reopen at the Hannibal Square Heritage Center in the heart of historic Winter Park's African American West Side. We have two representatives from the Heritage Center here today. Patrick Nossi and Barbara Chandler for being, I'm really happy that you made the trip and you are here today to celebrate the opening of the exhibition. I would like now to introduce Dr. Heather Russell, who is the Vice Provost for Faculty Leadership and Success in the Office of the Provost and a Professor of English, having joined FIU almost 20 years ago as an assistant professor. She specializes in African diaspora, African American, and Afro-Caribbean literature and theory. She has served as Dean of the School of Environment, Arts, and Society in the College of Arts, Sciences, and Education as the chair of the Department of English. In keeping with her commitment to the study of the humanities, she has worked with various state-based affiliates of the National Endowment of the Humanities and with the National Humanities Center. Will you please welcome Dr. Russell?
Thanks so much, Jordana. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, y'all know, those that know me know I like a proper good afternoon. Okay, so certainly it's a privilege to be here with you today representing the Office of the Provost. Interim Provost Behar sends her regrets. I'm certainly honored to be here to pay tribute to this year's MLK at the Frost celebration, which is a successful partnership between FIU's Office of Social Justice and Inclusion and the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum, and which began, I believe, some 12 years ago in 2011. This wonderful partnership has allowed FIU, through the visual arts and humanities, to continue to embrace the vision and ultimate goal of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his life's work, which is the right for all human beings to live unfettered lives marked by the full exercise and expression of their complete humanity. At FIU, diversity, equity, and inclusion are integral to our mission as a student-centered public research university, as are the hallmarks and tenets of the academic enterprise, such as freedom of scholarly inquiry, research and creative integrity, and the power of gathering together as we are today. FIU embraces and strives to ensure that all cultures, races, ethnicities, genders, beliefs, and identities thrive on our campus and throughout our community. I'm particularly honored to participate in today's opening of an elegy to Rosewood in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Rosewood Massacre. Historical events like the Rosewood Massacre, an event burned into our national history, our Florida history, indeed, our very landscape, are an important reminder of the imperative to address the painful legacies of the past, to embrace and effectuate the aims of diversity, social justice, civil and human rights, and to heed the words of another great human rights activist, Elie Wiesel, quote, "Not only are we responsible for the memories of the dead, we are responsible for what we do with those memories." To this end, none of this would be possible without our partners, both internal and external, and you have heard them named, so I and Giordano eloquently introduced them and thanked them, so I will not reiterate, only just to say that we're extremely grateful to all of you. I do want to congratulate the MLK committee, in particular the chair, Dr. David Bynes, and Calais. I want to also thank you for your persistence, perseverance, and vision, really, to actualize today's events. And of course, Ms. Jenkins, very much appreciate you, the artists, the Alex, Dan, our wonderful community here. And I also wish to acknowledge support over the years from our own Provost Emeritus, Doug Wartzog. And finally, I'd like to congratulate and thank Giordano and her team for embracing the vision of MLK at the Frost, making it their own, transforming what was a 3-week event to now an almost 3-month event. That is commitment. And as I understand it, Jordana was personally involved in identifying the artists and the artwork, and so I do want to thank you for your vision and your leadership. I hope that you do share in all of our sentiments that this partnership between the arts, humanities, and the legacy of Dr. King is one which bears preserving. And so I do urge your continued support. Don't let this be the one time that you come to the Frost, come back to this exhibit, bring your students, those of you that have them, bring your family members, the community. The Frost is a really important place, cultural site and space for all of us. And so without further ado, I declare the exhibit formally open. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. Thank you for the kind words and eloquent statements about the importance of partnership, and I think that's so critical. You know, one of the goals of the MLK committee is how do we partner with every college in this university so that it's not just the Office of Social Justice and Inclusion is planning everything, but get every colleges to be involved. So this is the last time you're going to hear from me. So before I introduce the final speaker, I do want to, Ms. Jenkins wanted to remind you that her business cards are in the front desk. And secondly, you know, we talked about massacres. Dr. Royles talked about the historical context of the massacres. So as a scientist and a researcher, I wanted to see the Rosewood Massacre in the context of the first time a white person landed on the US soil, and it goes 935 sometime at Leif Erikson. It's not Columbus, but Leif Erikson. And since then, how many massacres that happened? And can we some way portray that visually? And so I partnered with Gretchen Shanagel with Honors College, and she's also an art teacher from the Akartha. And so 50 art pieces were generated over the course of last year to depict a massacre, and the students were given a choice of picking a massacre to do, all right? And those pieces are being exhibited in the GC Gallery. The formal opening is in February 24th, where all the student artists will be there. And it's work, we are still putting up the pieces because we wanted to not only show all the black massacres, but we also want to show the white massacres. We wanted to show the Native American massacres. So you can really see it across the wall, the gamut of massacres that happen. And of course, you know, at a certain period in history, they all happen in a very short period because of the land grab is the main thing that drove the early massacres. So please come and join us, and that exhibit is also will be up till end of March, if not early April. And then there is, as part of this exhibit, the first 4 or 5 years I was curating, I had the artists do the pieces, students do the art pieces, right? And we commissioned the students, and all those pieces are sitting in archives. And one of the things we did is 1 year our MLK theme is health is the worst inequity, something to the effect that was the title of the theme. And we commissioned the artwork to show medical apartheid because the American doctors thought they were above Nuremberg Code. Nuremberg Code is code of ethics that you're supposed to follow when you do human research. But the American doctors thought they were above the Nuremberg Code, and they did a lot of atrocities. So there are about 20 pieces that were generated. In February, those pieces go up in the library for 2 months. So I invite you to come, and I don't know if they are planning an opening. I'll certainly be there. I'll be happy to share all the other pieces we have. If you're interested for any of the traveling exhibits, we certainly have all those pieces put together in a booklet that you can share. So with that, that's my last thing, and I do want to thank all of you for being here. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any good ideas. I'm always very open to ideas. So for me, now let me introduce Professor Arpat Kora, Tori Arpat Kota. She's site-based practice ranges deep into rusted remnants of farms past and unbuilt places accessible only on foot and kayak. She served as an artist in residence in Air, Everglades National Park, and Land Arts of the American West, a field study program at University of New Mexico. Her exhibitions include the Schumann's Biennial, Bulgaria, and others internationally since 1996. Her work is featured in Land Arts of the American West by Bill Gilbert and Chris Taylor, Confrontational Ceramics by Judith S. Schwartz, and Ceramics, and Mastering the Craft by Richard Zakin, Arpad Kota chairs by Richard Zakin, sorry. Dr. Arpad Kota chairs the FIU Art and Art History Department and works on the earth on a few acres in the Redland Agricultural District. And please welcome Dr. Arpad Kota, right? Yeah, Arpad Kota to say a few words on behalf of the internal sponsors.
Thank you. I'm both humbled and honored to be here. And I'm here in the place of Dean Brian Schreiner, who heads CARTA, the College of Communication, Architecture and the Arts there. I'll forget my own college there for a moment. I'm extraordinarily moved, and you probably noticed in my very long introduction, that I work a lot with memory and body, and I have to say, Miss Lizzie Jenkins, when you talk about us, how you carried this memory in your heart, I look at us in this group here, and I say, I think the thing that we are perhaps most fortunate and most blessed to experience is that we're all here together in a way, in body, particularly after a time in our world where we were very separated. And I believe we will probably all carry this with us in body as well. I need to share some thanks as well to Provost Elizabeth Behar, who of course couldn't be here, Vice Provost Heather Russell, who is here with us, Dr. Jordana Pomeroy, who is the director of the museum, our curators, Amy Galpin, and sorry, I'm a little nervous, Yari Rivera, right? The exhibit is put together in a really beautiful way when we think about history and memory, because there is this extraordinary history here, right? And we've been able to hear about it in words. Thank you, Miss Lizzie Jenkins, for sharing your words with us. We've been able to hear about it in the history and research from our panelists, but we also get to experience it in materials and image, right, from Pedro Jermaine and also the other artists who've been curated into the show. And so I want to give a big thank you to all of them. Some of our other within the university partners, the African and African Diaspora Studies, which of course is directed by Valerie Patterson, was a big supporter here too. I'm not going to go over all of our outside of the university supporters, but we are, because our last speaker will get to those as well. But we are really grateful to have so many people from outside of the university here with us. The partnerships that we have both in and outside of the institution, but also in our greater community, are what make us who we are. And so thank you to everyone. I know that Dr. David Barnes is coming next, and it wasn't in my notes to introduce him, but he is the committee chair for our MLK events and so many events that include this, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for everyone for being here and hanging in there with us. Ms. Liz, I want to tell you something. I first met Ms. Jenkins, probably about 20 years ago now, when I was a young, emerging student affairs professional, my first student affairs professional job at the University of Florida. And I still have my signed copy of the Real Rosewood book that you wrote. And so that book really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't know at the time. I like to tell people at the time I was very capitalistic. I was, all about, just moving up the corporate ladder, if you will, until I read that book and started to really understand history and the importance of history. And so I want to publicly thank you. James Baldwin once said that nothing or not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so as I think about what is happening here at the MLK, at the Frost event, I can't help but think about Baldwin's words in the fact that we are choosing to face something head on. And I think it's because of this diligence and because of the charisma and the courage to do so that we are standing on the precipice of change. And so I want to simply thank Ms. Jenkins and the entire Real Rosewood Foundation for the work that they've done tirelessly over the years. Also think about the importance of oral history and storytelling, particularly to the culture of indigenous people and black identifying people. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that every time throughout our history in what we call the United States, that where there's been advancement, we've also seen backlash. And so it is paramount for me that we acknowledge that here today. This event is endearing to me because it marks the end of the 2023 MLK commemorative celebration. And what a way to end. And so I want to thank all the MLK committee members that are in our presence today. But I also want to thank our external sponsors. As someone already said, and I'll say it this way, social change can't happen without money, right? And so we want to thank the Knight Foundation and the Green Family Foundation, again, the Real Rosewood Foundation, the Florida Humanities, and Humanities Edge as well. And I also like to give a special shout out to the Frost director, Dr. Pomeroy, and thank you for always opening the doors and being in partnership with the MLK committee. Finally, to my staff, this does not happen without teamwork. And so in addition to being the chair of the MLK Commemorative Committee, I also serve as the director for the Office of Social Justice and Inclusion. And so I want to thank my staff for the tireless and countless hours that they've also put in beyond the work that the committee does. And so thank you to those. I know a couple came with me. I don't know if they're still here. I do see Jeff, and Jeff definitely works tirelessly as he heads up probably about 3 of our subcommittees. And so thank you to my team there. And finally, I simply want to thank the presence of the ancestors. I believe that there is a call to action from the ancestors, and as I listen to Ms. Jenkins and to tell her story, I have no doubt that the ancestors are here and surrounding, and we hear them. And so I believe that we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge their presence and the understanding of the call to action that is here now. And that call to action simply is to do something. And I close with this. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, I think it's fitting on the edge of Black History Month, and Dr. Carter G. Woodson said that those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history. And I simply ask you this: who are your forebears, and what did they accomplish, and then what inspires you to pick up where they left off? Thank you all so much for being here with us today.